As I said last time, I'll be sparing you the Hatsu series preamble from here on out. And since there's no manipulation-specific preamble like conjuration required, we can actually get right into it for a change. Don't you worry though, there'll be an even greater number of tangents in this one than in the conjuration video. At level 1, as the most basic innate mechanic of manipulation, we have aura manipulation, which entails the control of primarily emitted aura. The reason I say primarily would take too long to get into here, and is part of a wider topic on just to what degree principles of Nen, such as Ten and Ren, influence and are influenced by the user's affinity for and proficiency in a particular category. To get back on track, as said, manipulation's baseline mechanic of aura manipulation primarily entails the control of emitted aura. Now, while we haven't seen such a Hatsu, the most salient example of this mechanic would be someone controlling an emitted projectile made of pure aura. As in, imagine if Franklin's bullets could hone in on the opponent, or could be consciously manipulated to change trajectory mid-air. As it stands, Shakomono's 11 black children are probably the baseline simplest application of this mechanic we've seen. His Hatsu entails that he fills 11 person-shaped balloons with aura and then manipulates either the aura or the suits themselves. Since I already have too many examples of object/substance manipulation, the next manipulation mechanic, I'm choosing to interpret this ability as him controlling the aura inside the balloons in such a way as to mimic human movement. Other examples include the manipulation of proper emitted Nen beasts such as Razor's Devils and Gorenu's Sages. They're proper because they're actually given shape and solidity through basic transmutation instead of a physical container like Shakomono's soldiers require. Nonetheless, Shakomono's glorified party balloons, Razor's Devils, and Gorenus are all ultimately constructs of pure aura, and therefore shouldn't differ in the complexity of manipulation needed to control them. Bear in mind, the number and precision of the controlled constructs has nothing to do with a Hatsu's complexity, i.e. its level, but the user's force and accuracy. Force would determine the number of constructs a Nen user would be able to effectively control at once, while accuracy would determine the precision of their movements. By the way, since I've already given complexity ratings to the vast majority of emission, transmutation, and conjuration-based Hatsu I'll mention here, I won't bother repeating myself unless I'm amending a Hatsu's complexity upon re-evaluating the level of manipulation needed to make it possible. From pure aura manipulation, we move on to a more advanced application of the same mechanic. Namely, the mechanic I've awkwardly termed conjured/transmuted object/substance manipulation. Stupid name, I know, but this is basically where all the conjured or transmuted Nen creations go. Think Kurapika's chains, Shoot's hands, Flutter's dragonflies, Hisoka's bungee gum, Killwa's electricity, and so on. If it was created by Nen and is being controlled at a distance or given pre-programmed commands, it's using this mechanic of manipulation. A good example of baseline conjured object manipulation, since it doesn't require emission, would be Kurapika's chains. In the conjuration installment of this series, I debated whether or not Kurapika was actually using manipulation to control his chains, but then later realized that he has to. One of the main reasons he pulled off his victory against Uvogin is because he tricked him into thinking he was a manipulator using real chains to fight. And since real chains cannot be inned, Uvo wasn't on the lookout for the invisible chains coming for him. As such, in order to pass for a manipulator, it's reasonable to think that he was indeed controlling his chains throughout their bout. Not counting any of his many additional abilities, the simple manipulation of his attached chains counts as the most basic application of conjured object manipulation, and would entail a low level 2 mechanic. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't cover and break down Shoot's Hotel Rafflesia. Rafflesia. Since, to be honest with you, when I first watched and finished the Chimera Ant arc, I wasn't really sure what his ability was all about. As it stands, it's not that difficult to explain. First, the hands seem to be conjured, since I don't think he's just carrying around 3 disembodied left hands, and are then manipulated with great speed and precision to attack the target. Since they're flying around him, basic emission has to be used to sustain the effect as well. Also, since they hit with enough force to hurt Killua, it's safe to assume that enhancement is used to empower them. While they do rely on very basic mechanics, these mechanics are nonetheless innate to 4 different categories. As such, I'd put just the hands at a high level 3. Apart from the conjured hands, by making physical contact with an opponent using his actual right hand, Shoot can activate Hotel Reflexia, inside which he can teleport the portion of an opponent's body he touched. Much like Knuckles' Hakuware, this was obviously created to subdue opponents without needing to overly hurt them, since the teleportation causes no actual damage to the opponent. Once the opponent is thoroughly patted down by Mr. Bad Touch, they are completely teleported inside the birdcage that is Hotel Reflexia. Just imagine those scathing 1-star reviews. So, to break it down, the falsely advertised hotel is level 1 object conjuration. The teleportation effect is done through partial transpositioning, a very strong level 3 emission-based mechanic, while the conditional shrinkage effect is accomplished through the level 5 transmutation-based mechanic of body transfiguration. Now, as a manipulator, transmutation would be Shoot's opposite category, meaning that a level 5 mechanic should, under normal circumstances, be outside his reach. Pun not intended. However, given the conditions of him A. needing to physically touch the opponent with the one hand he has, B. that the opponent suffers no direct damage, and C. that they are shrunk piecemeal, all more than compensate for this overreach. Pun intended. As such, I'd put Reflexia, not counting the hands since they're separate Hatsu, at a high level 6. Overall, Shoot may be the only character in the series whose skill set requires him to use all the 5 basic categories to some extent, which, while being a bit scattershot, is nonetheless quite impressive. Now, let's quickly cover how manipulation can be applied to transmuted substances. In general, Hisoka's bungee gum does not utilize manipulation. Everything Hisoka does with it, like controlling its elasticity, rubberiness, and stickiness, is all done through pure transmutation. However, during his battle with Chrollo, Hisoka attached his gum to multiple individuals, after first sticking it to the floor, only to have the gum suddenly retract and send the poor bastards flying towards Chrollo. Since the gum wasn't connected to him, apart from basic emission being used to maintain its properties, manipulation had to be used for Hisoka to trigger its retraction remotely. On a different note, Killua's whirlwind works thanks to this basic use of manipulation as well, which is a good thing since both him and Hisoka are transmuters with manipulation as their opposite category. What he does is imbue his electricity with certain predetermined commands, sets a trigger, and then has the electricity coursing through his body follow it. Unlike Hisoka's bungee gum, which doesn't inherently require this mechanic of manipulation in order to function, Killua's whirlwind very much does, technically counting as a transmutation facilitated manipulation-based ability. Finally, let's discuss Moral and his deep purple, or as I like to call it, Schrodinger's puff. Is his smoke transmuted or conjured? I won't get into why this ambiguity exists in the first place, since I've spoken about it in previous videos. Suffice it to say, there's conflicting evidence on it. In any case, since this mechanic is termed conjured/transmuted, object/substance, manipulation, it being either doesn't really matter that much, since I'll do my best to address both interpretations. So, as a baseline, if it relies on the level 3 transmutation-based mechanic of substance transmutation, Deep Purple would be at a high level 4. While if it relies on substance conjuration, which if it were the case would make it the only example of this conjuration-based mechanic, with a complexity level of 2, i.e. 1 level above object conjuration, and would thus make Deep Purple a low level 4 Hatsu. Now, again, regardless whether it was transmuted or conjured, the biggest problem with Deep Purple is explaining all the things it can do without just evoking specialization. Seriously, there are super flexible and versatile Hatsu like Hisoka's bungee gum, Killua's various electricity-based abilities, Razor's devils, and so on. But they all pale in comparison to everything Deep Purple has been shown to do. Actually, a lot of things it does do are complex enough where I think they should be labeled as their own offshoot Hatsu, similar to how Killua's Lightning Palm, Thunderbolt, Godspeed Whirlwind, and Godspeed Speed of Lightning are. For example, Moral's ability to mold his smoke into unbreakable shackles, create smoke and solidify it while underwater, change the shape and color of the smoke to create clones of himself or other people capable of speech, create highly responsive smoke soldiers with an emitted Nen core, and so on, could all pass for named abilities. However, the only named Hatsu derivative of Deep Purple is his Smoky Jail, which allows him to create an all but unbreakable dome of smoke to entrap himself with his opponent. Let's try to break them down as best we can. If it is transmuted, I'm genuinely not sure how Moral is able to make the smoke as durable as it is. Hisoka, for example, can control the elasticity and rubberiness of his aura, and thus control just how much solidity it has, along with the resistance it offers. Zakuro can manipulate his liquid blood to stabilize and form a solid shape, such as tendrils, and since the blood is physical, most likely uses enhancement to further reinforce it. But enhancement cannot be used on transmuted substances as far as I'm concerned, since enhancing aura with pure aura simply makes no sense to me, as discussed in previous videos. Also, Zakuro's blood obviously changes in shape and looks solidified, while Moral Smoke retains its smoky quality. This durability increase and pseudo-solidification are therefore either A, some feature of pure transmutation I lack the imagination to account for, but which may have to do with Nobunaga's statement in chapter 398 that transmutation can apparently be used on structures such as walls to make them significantly more durable, though increasing the durability of a wall does seem like it'd be much easier than doing so with smoke, since unlike a solid cement or steel wall, smoke basically has no baseline durability, on account of it being goddamn smoke. And or B, a product of Moral's limitation that also allows him to form his smoke underwater. Note that, as a limitation, he must always hold his pipe and use it as a medium for turning his aura into smoke, which may have been initially necessitated by his profession as a sea hunter. As in, the ability of his smoke to solidify while retaining its smoky property may have come about due to his need to deploy his Hatsu underwater, such as in the case of rescuing people from a shipwreck or subduing an underwater magical beast. The property of his smoke to form underwater may have then, over the years, evolved into it being able to solidify and thus made possible techniques like his shackles and Smoky Jail. By the way, the insane durability of Smoky Jail could have also been increased through the limitation that he must entrap himself with his opponent. And considering Moral's diminished capacity at the time due to overexertion, paired with his opponent being a royal guard, him choosing to willingly put himself in the lion's den could have done wonders to boost its durability. That still doesn't explain the shackles though, but it's something. While I do feel this is a cop-out on my part, it could simply be a supernatural property of the smoke created through a limitation and not an actual categorical mechanic. Pretty much the same rationale can be applied if the smoke is conjured instead, with the added benefit of that smoke actually being enhanceable. I have neither the time nor willpower to discuss all the other things it can do, which barely make sense, so I'll leave it here for now. At some point, you just have to evoke the rule of cool and be done with it. Next, we move on to object/substance manipulation, which, since I'm overly pedantic, entails the control of mundane or non-Nen created objects or substances. This, since I view controlling conjured objects or transmuted substances as more intuitive and thus marginally less complex than doing so with physical objects imbued with aura. I say this because conjured objects, for example, are already made up of the user's aura, to the point that can be applied to them, while the same is not true of physical objects which are simply imbued with aura. In any case, the difference is minute, but I felt I needed to make it nonetheless. I'd still put this mechanic as a level 2, just a high level 2. For objects, think Gido controlling his tops or Kaluto his paper confetti, while for substances, think Zakuro controlling his blood. Let's first tackle Kaluto's dance of the serpent's bite, which allows him to control thousands of enhanced paper confetti to initially swarm and then strategically dismantle opponents with. The ability requires basic, relatively potent, and very precise manipulation, very basic but potent enhancement, and again very basic basic but at least moderately potent emission in order to function. To explain, since his general tactic is to target an opponent's weak points, his manipulation of the thousands of confetti must be quite deft. His enhancement has to be relatively potent, since Kaluto's using Shu to simultaneously enhance at least a few hundred individual confetti at once, if not even 1,000 or more. And his emission, while super basic, has to be of at least a moderate potency, simply because maintaining control of, as well as enhancing so many objects at once, would require a decent proficiency in it. Thankfully, as a manipulator, Kaluto has an 80% affinity for emission, meaning that this shouldn't pose an issue for him whatsoever. While Dance of the Serpent's Bite relies on 3 different categories in order to function, greatly adding to its multi-categorical complexity, the innate complexity of each of those 3 is at a level 2 or lower, meaning that I'd put it down at a moderate level 3. By the way, his surveillance paper dolls, which allow Kaluto to hear anything said in the vicinity of the person to whom a piece of confetti is attached through a paper effigy of them, has nothing to do with manipulation and is pure emission. More precisely, it's the level 4 mechanic of property transference, where what's being transferred is the sound in an individual's vicinity. Moving on. Next, let's move on to Zakuro's Bloody Mary, which allows him to control his blood. He has been shown is capable of shaping it so it takes on a more solid form, becoming strong enough to lift and then slam unconscious an adult male amateur nen user. As far as I'm concerned, this is almost pure manipulation. The shape and density of the blood is all being manipulated by the aura it is imbued with. Now, don't think that this entails Zakuro changing the properties of the blood on a molecular level or something like that, to make it denser, for example. He's accomplishing that by manipulating its shape, while the lifting and striking power of the created tendrils would be proportional to his manipulation potency. Unlike smoke, blood is an actually tangible substance, after all. Since we are dealing with a physical substance, I have to assume enhancement is being used to increase all the aforementioned properties as well. Finally, unlike with Kaluto's confetti, emission is not being used, since the blood is still connected to his body. All in all, I'd put Zakuro's Bloody Mary at a low level 3. Let's now move on to the baseline level 3 manipulation mechanic of creature manipulation. Creature manipulation entails taking control of any living creature that is not a human or a fully sapient magical beast, such as the Kiriko. So far, we've seen 4 manipulators utilize this mechanic, namely Ponzu to control her bees, Leech to control his leeches, Squall to control his squallas, dogs, and Sayard to control any one animal the size of or smaller than a rodent. The first 3, i.e. Ponzu, Leech, and Squalla, do not make their animals exhibit any supernatural properties apart from obeying their commands, which puts the abilities of all 3 at a high level 3, i.e. just slightly above the level of the mechanic itself, since basic emission needs to be used as well. The only one who complements his control over animals with an additional supernatural effect is Sayard, who isn't a manipulator but an emitter. Sayard emits a ball of aura to capture a critter and is then able to share its senses while it is under his control. This perception sharing is accomplished through the aforementioned baseline level 4 emission mechanic of property transference, where what's emitted is visual input. This puts his ability at an overall low level 6. Sayard, a relative nen scrub having such a complex ability, makes sense, since in order to manifest it, he had to put quite a few limitations, such as the animal having to be of a specific size, him having to capture the critter first with an emitted projectile slow enough to miss certain faster insects, along with it being implied that he can control only one animal at a time. To emphasize yet again, limitations and pledges do not make an ability more complex, but can allow someone who lacks the necessary proficiency to develop more complex or powerful abilities than their level of proficiency would otherwise allow for. From creature manipulation, we move on to another level 3 manipulation mechanic, namely Sentience infusion. Sentience infusion can fulfill a few functions, the most basic of which is for a construct, object, or substance to be imbued with the most basic degree of sentience needed in order to fulfill a specific task, such as to identify a specific individual based on a description. For this, think Zakuro's blood droplets attempting to find and identify Hisoka. Another, slightly more complex application of this mechanic would be for a construct to exhibit a specific personality, so that it acts in a certain way without manual control from the user being needed. Think Moral's clones, but not his soldiers, Bisky's Cookie-chan, the majority of the Greed Island NPCs, and so on. These Nen entities lack the proper sentience to identify more complex cognitive concepts and categories, instead simply exhibiting certain personality traits, such as Cookie-chan acting like she's a cutesy magical girl, while only being capable of automatically performing a preset number of massages and treatments Bisky has programmed into her. Her not being able to do more than this, or even being capable of speech, makes sense, since manipulation is Bisky's opposite category. Moral's clones of himself and Knuckle, which are created without the emitted Nen core the soldiers have, are imbued with and automatically exhibit their respective personalities, while at the same time being manually controlled by Moral to complete more complex actions. Now, while this application of Sentience infusion has its practical uses, such as in the case of Moral's clones confusing the enemy by concealing the original among them, it can also just serve as a manifestation of a Nen user's quirkiness, such as in the case of Cookie-chan. Hunters tend to lean on the eccentric side of things, and the best Hatsu are not necessarily the most optimized ones, but those that reflect an individual and their idiosyncrasies. However, in order for a construct to be given a more general task, such as patrolling a city in order to eliminate all hostiles while keeping a low profile, it must first be capable of identifying all the various concepts in order to properly execute such a general command. This is where the more advanced applications of this mechanic come into play. Good examples would be 4th Prince Terror Sandwiches and 13th Prince Mariam's Guardian Spirit Beasts, capable of retaining information in the long term and taking initiative to protect their respective hosts. Razor's Devil Zero, capable of maintaining a conversation, supposing it can answer questions not related to dodgeball, that is, and Moral's emitted Nen soldiers, capable of following complex instructions and identifying and implementing basic combat tactics. Out of these, however, the two mentioned Guardian Spirit Beasts are by far the most impressive. Now, I believe this mechanic to be scalable with regards to its innate complexity, meaning that a level 3 estimation is the minimum baseline. Similar to how the emission-based property transference starts at a moderate level 4 but can increase in complexity based on what's being transferred. As in, while Lynch's inner voice transference would be a moderate level 4, Terabellum's damage transfer would be closer to a 6. This while Halkenberg's soul or mind transference would be at about a 9. On the other hand, creating 1 versus 100 Nen beasts is entirely a difference in power and accuracy and not complexity, as stated a bunch of times by now. In other words, the difference between the simple and more complex Nen constructs, objects, or substances imbued with sentience is one of kind, not merely degree, due to the fact that they must be imbued with fundamentally more novel and complex concepts in order to function. As such, while this mechanic is present at a level 3 in constructs such as Cookie-chan, it can go indefinitely higher than that. To determine exactly how high it can go, let us look at the Guardian Spirit Beast, whose whole ability is basically to exhibit the highest level of sentience possible. 10th Prince Kacho's GSB's ability, called Without You Season of 2, which is triggered to replace either her or her twin sister 11th Prince Fugetsu upon either's death. After Kacho passed, her GSB took her appearance, personality, and memories in order to support and protect Fugetsu. Apart from involving the conjuration of a Nen beast, a level 2 conjuration mechanic, this ability also involves the baseline level 4 emission-based mechanic of property transference, where what's transferred this time are a person's memories. While at a baseline level 4, I'd put memory transference closer to a very high level 5. Finally, the level of sentience Kacho's replica would need to be imbued with to properly synthesize and make use of all the original's memories would have to be beyond anything we've seen thus far in the series. So much so that it could be a 10 in its own right. But to stay on the conservative side, I'll put it at a moderate 8, i.e. at what I'd say is above average human intelligence. All in all, this puts Kacho's GSB at a 10+, complex with regards to its complexity. However, considering the extreme severity of its condition, i.e. that it only manifests upon the death of one of the twins, I'd say this is entirely within acceptable parameters of possibility. From Sentience infusion, we move on to the baseline low level 4 mechanic of self-manipulation. We know of two characters capable of doing this, namely Shalnark and Shikaku, but have seen only Shalnark's autopilot mode in action. Self-manipulation serves two main purposes. One, to counter other manipulators, since manipulation works on a first-come, first-served basis, and two, as a limitation. By limiting oneself to certain actions and thoughts, effectively the opposite of Sentience infusion, other aspects of oneself, such as one's physical stats or aura output, can be boosted. For example, autopilot mode is an enhancement-based but manipulation-facilitated ability which allows Shal to limit his cognition with the instructions to identify and annihilate all enemies in the vicinity, during which time his enhancement capabilities are pushed into overdrive. Apart from boosting his physical stats, it also grants him a huge aura boost, making his Ren give him that Super Saiyan glow. Due to Shalnark's an impressive 60% affinity for enhancement, a limitation, or more likely just a consequence, of him boosting his enhancement capacity well beyond its normal limits, is his body feeling fatigued and sore after only a few seconds of usage, meaning that this mode isn't to be used for prolonged bouts, to say the least. While it does rely on two mechanics of enhancement to make the Hatsu possible, both are relatively simple and don't add too much with regards to complexity. Overall, I'd put Shalnark's autopilot mode at a very strong level 5. Next, at a moderate level 5, we have the manipulation mechanic of partial person manipulation, specifically emotion/memory manipulation. Abilities utilizing this mechanic do not directly take control of a person's mind and body, but influence their emotions or memories to indirectly exert control over them. Think melody inducing a feeling of calmness and serenity in those that hear her song. This often has the effect of basically stunning those that hear it, as they are transfixed by the performance to such a degree that they experience visual hallucinations. Melody is not actually a manipulator, but a manipulation midpoint emitter. Nonetheless, I forgot to cover her when I covered emitters in the first installment of this series, so I'm doing so now. Melody is a manipulation-based but emission-facilitated ability, which utilizes extremely basic but nonetheless potent emission to carry the hypnotic effect of her song over long distances, and even speakers. This puts her Hatsu at a low level 6. Another example of emotional manipulation would be 6th Prince Tyson's Guardian Spirit Beast. While we don't know everything it can do, we do know it has a conjuration and emission facilitated but manipulation-based ability. The little conjured fairies, as Izunabi termed them, take the aura from all those that have come across and were at least somewhat responsive to Tyson's teachings, and imbue them with feelings of infatuation and elation in return. The more the person listens to Tyson and is open to their teachings, both Tyson's sex and gender are ambiguous, hence the neutral pronoun, the larger the number of fairies that cluster around them, exchanging aura for happiness. In this way, people are gradually conditioned to love and obey Tyson, without their minds being directly and totally coerced. This ability involves what I have to imagine is the level 3 emission-based mechanic of temporary aura transference, since permanent aura transference, the likes of Meruem's, would be insane. A baseline level 2 conjuration-based ability to create the various little Nen beasts, and the moderate level 5 manipulation-based mechanic of emotional manipulation, which puts the ability of Tyson's GSB at a high level 8, which actually isn't overly complex for a GSB. Now let's go over an example of memory manipulation. While I could be mistaken, the only, potentially, but more on that in another video, non-specialist example of this is 9th Prince Halkenberg's GSB, which is able to alter or erase certain memories in those people it affects. Now, while you may think altering memories is way more powerful than altering emotions, and that memory alteration should be a level above, I thought so too at first, but after ruminating on it a bit, I do think they should be around the same level. Altering one's memories does not alter one's emotions, just like altering altering one's emotions doesn't alter one's memories. If either were to suddenly occur, a NEN user would be able to realize that something was off, while a non-NEN user would be fairly easily manipulated in either case. I won't go into explaining Helk's GSB now, since it's overly complicated. Suffice it to say, the memory alteration part of its Hatsu is a moderate level 5 manipulation-based mechanic. At a high level 5, we have an even more advanced application of aura manipulation, namely Hatsu manipulation. So, I believe that temporary Hatsu transference, the likes of Kurapika's steel chain, to be a level 4 emission-based ability mechanic and an advanced application of aura transference. However, temporarily taking away a Hatsu doesn't mean one can now use it just like that. After all, just stealing a NEN user's Hatsu for any length of time is a solid ability in its own right. Having the ability to then use that stolen Hatsu, even if only one time, puts such an ability in a different league entirely with regards to complexity, and in my mind, there's no category among the regular 5 that is able to accomplish this feat barring manipulation. As I'm sure you're well aware, one's ability is one's own personal expression of NEN, and is, under normal circumstances, evoked by the 4th basic principle of NEN, namely Hatsu. However, I do not believe that evoking this principle is enough to manifest and activate the effect of a Hatsu that is not one's own expression of NEN. Instead, I believe an advanced application of manipulation is required, where what's taken control of and manipulated is not another person's mind or body, but their aura in the form of their Hatsu. Quite controversial, I know, since it relies on a high level 4 emission and a high level 5 manipulation mechanic. I'd put these kinds of abilities at a moderate level 8 with regards to their baseline complexity. This would serve to explain why a manipulator like Shikaku developed an ability like his Concept King of Games. Concept allowed Shikaku to procure another's ability and turn it into a card to then presumably use it against them. Being a manipulator with emission as his adjacent category, together with the fact that he had to take on the serious risk of being attacked by his opponent's ability first before he could try to procure it, making Concept a pseudo-counteractive type and thus accounting for the fact that someone of Shikaku's caliber was able to develop such a complex Hatsu, makes this, in my opinion, a valid interpretation of what Concept mechanically entailed. Overall, since it also involves the simple conjuration of a card to store the procured ability, I'd put Shikaku's Concept at a high level 8. At a very high level 6, we have the most powerful application of partial person manipulation, namely aura suppression. Aura suppression entails forcing the target in a state of Zetsu by closing their aura nodes. Think Knuckles' APR turning into IRS or Kurapika's chain jail. The reason forcing Zetsu has to be higher than Hatsu manipulation is because A. Hatsu manipulation is a contingent mechanic, meaning that in order for it to be used, the manipulated ability first has to be acquired via other means, and B. because we've seen multiple NEN users belonging to various categories acquire the abilities of others in some way or another, while enforcing Zetsu is much rarer and is, as far as I can recall, limited to Knuckle and Kurapika. As conjurers with a 60% proficiency in manipulation, this mechanic of it would just barely be within their reach if they were master-level conjurers that have trained extensively in manipulation over decades, which of course neither are, hence why they have to rely on conditions, limitations, and pledges in order to evoke it. Kurapika does so by limiting his judgment chain to only a single group of people, namely the Phantom Troop, with the added pledge that he would die should he ever use it on anyone outside the group. On the other hand, Knuckles' whole Hatsu of either brawling or stalling an opponent into bankruptcy is built on the condition of the opponent forcefully entering Zetsu as its end goal. In the Conjuration installment, I put Chain Jail at a level 4, listing Forced Zetsu as a mid-level manipulation mechanic on intuition, since I had yet to really break it down. I'm amending that and putting it instead at a moderate level 7, since it is facilitated by a conjured object, which is at a level 1. On a similar note, I'm bumping up Knuckles Hakaware from a level 7 all the way to a moderate level 9. Hakuware is a conjured Nen beast, which is a level 3 ability. The emission-based aura transference is also at a 3, and the high level 6 aura suppression effect puts Hakuware at a moderate level 9. No wonder Knuckle doesn't have any other abilities, his Nen memory is spent. I guess not everyone's willing to literally kill themselves for a power boost, Pika? Finally, we come to the most prototypical and feared application of manipulation. Complete person manipulation, which is at a moderate level 7. It being so high means that essentially no one that isn't a manipulator can evoke it without employing some incredibly hefty limitations and pledges. Which makes sense, since I don't believe we've ever seen an individual Nen user who wasn't a manipulator take full control of someone else, not counting specialists. There are quite a few examples of this ability type in manipulators, as you might imagine, so I'll only cover one for illustration purposes. Before I do though, there's one thing I need to go into now that we're here. Different methods to achieving mind control. I'm sure some of you expected me to go into depth on coercive, pseudo-coercive, soliciting, or diffusive induction manipulation types in this video. However, none of these are mechanics. They are simply limitations which facilitate specific mechanics. As an example, while coercive manipulation entails forcefully and directly taking control of someone's mind, such as Illumi, Shal, and Baze do, pseudo-coercive entails putting the victim in a position where they themselves trigger the conditions for coercive manipulation, due to their own bad judgment, such as 12th Prince Momose's GSB does with its whole are you free shtick. Both have the same goal of taking away someone's mind and body through the mechanic of complete person manipulation. It's just that one requires much more aura than the other to accomplish because of the different limitations employed. If direct coercive manipulation, the kind of Illumi exhibits for example, requires 100 aura per person, let's say, Momose's more indirect method would perhaps require 50 or less. Since she was a young girl with very limited aura reserves, it made sense for her GSB to evolve in such a way. But for more info on that, feel free to check out the 12th Prince Momose video. This, while soliciting type manipulation, which subtly and gradually conditions the target into obeying the user, like 9th Prince Halk's GSB does, could require as little as 25 aura per person affected, if not less, since those that were not already partial to the prince couldn't be swayed easily or at all. To get back on track, since I'll talk about both Illumi and Shonark in the upcoming final installment of the How to Defeat Every Phantom Troop member video, I've decided to showcase this ability mechanic with none other than Baze. Yes, really. This due to two reasons. One, because pretty much all of these abilities come down to the same level of complexity, being at an overall high level 7 to low level 8. Due to this mechanic's almost inherent reliance on basic emission to maintain control of a target over long distances. So it doesn't really matter which ability I use as an example. And two, because she's the most amateurish Nen user that utilizes this ability mechanic, and I'd like to analyze how such an amateur was able to develop such a complex ability. The answer, as you might have guessed, is limitations and pledges. In order to control someone, she needs to fulfill certain conditions and abide by certain limitations, some of which we definitely know about, some of which are heavily implied, and some of which are my assumptions. We know that there's the definite condition of her needing to kiss someone in order to take control of them, turning them into masochistic slaves entirely infatuated with their domineering mistress. And we also know that there's a definite limitation that the forced infatuation lasts for 3 hours. Now, the heavily implied limitations are that the target must be a man, since the term manservant is used, and that the kiss has to be non-consensual, since she terms it as her stealing a kiss. Finally, my own assumptions are that A, she can control only one man at once, since she's never seen controlling more than one, B, the man in question needs to find her attractive at least to some extent, and C, she can't use it on the same man consecutively within a certain period. Otherwise, the 3-hour limitation doesn't mean much. Even if only some of the implied and assumed limitations are true, they are quite enough to allow a relatively amateurish Nen user, let's say of a moderate level 4, to develop a high level 7 Hatsu, especially since the Hatsu Hatsu is essentially entirely within her native category of manipulation. Oh, by the way, if you're thinking why Instant Lover is classified as mind manipulation and not emotional manipulation, it's because she's absolutely mind controlling her targets by entirely changing their personalities in a specific way and doesn't simply bolster their affection towards her. So, with essentially all the mechanics I could think of gone over, I have one more thing to pester you with before I bring this video to a close. Manipulation and transformation. I've, for the longest time, believed that transformation lies primarily within the domain of transmutation and conjuration. And after finishing my analysis of manipulation, I feel confident in saying that I stand by it. In my mind, transmutation governs change or alteration, which entirely accounts for body transformations like Bisky's and, thanks to his magical beast origin, Yuppie's as well. Conjuration governs creation, which primarily accounts for transformations like Bonolenov's and Tsubone's. What I believe Bono does with his metamorphosin is conjure unto himself the hair and clothing of the person he transforms into, while utilizing transmutation, his adjacent category, to alter his facial features and height. Tsubone uses conjuration to conjure various vehicle parts and then utilizes transmutation to mold her body to properly facilitate them and make a coherent whole. Manipulation governs control, and while not impossible, I don't think it's really good at facilitating shapeshifting. Those manipulators we've seen alter their appearances are Illumi, Shiapoof, and Zazan, though Zazan's category hasn't been officially confirmed. The problem with the last two is that they're chimera ants, and take a shot if you heard this one before, with them it's difficult to tell where their alien morphology stops and their abilities start. For example, Poof's gimmick was his nigh-perfect control of his own body's cells, and just like Yuppie could transmute his body to manifest the latent potential of the many magical beasts comprising his being, so could Poof's alien morphology have allowed him to manipulate his own body's cells to such an extent that he could entirely copy someone's voice, alter his appearance, diffuse his body into particles small enough to pass through smoke, and even divide his body into a bunch of chibi versions of himself. This kind of innate control of his own body's cells was something he was born with and then used to facilitate such an amazing manipulation-based Hatsu. I genuinely don't think a human manipulator could ever create a Hatsu like Beelzebub. Not due to a lack of skill, but due to a lack of not being a chimera ant. As such, since he is a chimera ant with an alien morphology, it's difficult to judge just how innately complex this sort of application of manipulation is for him, since unlike Yuppie's body transfiguration, his is entirely unique and as such without a reference point. However, since I gave Yuppie a rating, I feel obliged to give Poof one as well. I'd put this unique to him mechanic of cellular manipulation, let's call it, at a high level 9. Making it the most innately complex manipulation mechanic. Since it presumably requires the baseline level 3 mechanic of Sentience infusion as well, this puts a Hatsu like Beelzebub at a nigh untenable, if not actually untenable, high level 10. As things stand, Poof was not only a chimera ant, but also a royal guard, and therefore cannot be used as a benchmark or model for what should and shouldn't be possible for humans. The only confirmed human manipulator we've seen alter his form is Illumi. But if manipulation was efficient in facilitating transformations in humans, why must a pure manipulator of such a high caliber use needles as a medium and limitation for changing his appearance? In order to maintain his facial transformation for more than 5 hours, he needs to use his needles, without which he is actually unable to change the appearance of his eyes. If a transmuter like Bisky can maintain her cutesy form indefinitely, and a conjurer like Bonolenov can change into anyone he has ever met after doing a short jig, why does a manipulator like Illumi have so much trouble just maintaining a simple facial change? We can make sense of this by seeing his facial alteration as an application of transmutation, wherein his facial features and hair are altered via the use of his opposite category. Hence the cumbersome limitation of him needing needles in order to not only maintain maintain but also complete his transformation, specifically through the application of body transfiguration, a level 5 transmutation-based mechanic, i.e. a mechanic which without specific limitations or conditions, such as the use of needles, would be just beyond Illumi's capability as a manipulator. I lied, I forgot one thing. No confirmed manipulator uses it, so it slipped my mind. Corpse manipulation. Think Ikalgo, Pito, and Misha. Actually, Illumi may or may not use it. It's implied he's got a few different types of needles, but them being so weird and undefined is one of the reasons I didn't want to talk about him. In any case, I'd put corpse manipulation at a, low level 3, so between object and creature manipulation. To quickly at least cover Ikalgo, apart from controlling a corpse, he also has the ability to use their Hatsu, which is the level 5 manipulation mechanic of Hatsu control, making his ability Living Dead Dolls a low level 7 with regards to complexity. Even though the Hatsu itself is at a level 7, the individual mechanics comprising it are at a low 3 and a moderate 5, meaning that they are within reach of an enhancer such as himself. Yes, Ikalgo's is an enhancer. His limitations are more than appropriate for this ability level because A, he first needs to find a corpse of a Nen user, B, despite having such an ability, he doesn't actually have the nerve to kill someone, which was a big part of his character, and C, he doesn't halt the corpse's decomposition. It's still a highly inefficient ability for an enhancer, but the limitations and conditions do justify its existence at the very least. And that's manipulation done. Yes, I noticed I'm using the color scheme for delineating between low, moderate, and high-level mechanics/abilities in reverse in the video than in the thumbnails. I do not have the energy to go back and fix it, and let's be fair, you didn't even notice before I told you just now. Before anything else, I'd like to thank Kamaswami, Tom Gnome, Augustin, Nassan, and Ekgen8 for going the extra mile in supporting the channel. With very niche but time-consuming videos like these, the support genuinely means a lot. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you like more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.